everybody. Welcome to Rust Belt Startup. This is a podcast full of long-form conversations with artists, entrepreneurs, educators, or people that are living unconventional lives in unconventional locations. So if you're new here, happy to have you, and hope that we got some long-timers, some oldsters checking this episode out too. And this is a super long-distance Rust Belt Startup pod. So talk about living unconventional lives in unconventional locations. My guest today is Casey Massimino, and Casey joined me all the way from Sicily in Italy. She is the founder and executive director of Green Arrow CoLab, which is an organization, a not-for-profit organization that combines mindfulness and gardening to impact the lives of people that are coming out of prison or that have been impacted by the justice system. I first heard of Casey's work from my wife, Sarah, who had spent some time with her recently on a very intensive meditation retreat. And I was super interested in her story from growing up in Vermont and working in digital media, and then kind of taking a U-turn and settling down in Italy and starting a not-for-profit that combines gardening and mindfulness. Like, really, really interesting person. And I was super excited that she said she would join me for a podcast. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about the origin of Green Arrow CoLab and how the first project actually kind of got a partnership with Netflix. We'll get into some of the logistical challenges of starting not-for-profit, because I get these questions all the time from people. We'll talk about her time in digital media and how she was part of a team of creatives that were working on different forms of media, even launching shows for the internet that were based in text messages. I'll let her explain. And finally, we'll get into how she's built a life across a couple of continents, going from Vermont to the Caribbean and now finally settling in Sicily. And you can hear in our conversation the beautiful sunshine and roosters crowing, and it just makes me want to go to Italy. So super grateful for Casey's time, and I really hope that you guys enjoy this conversation with Casey Massimino. Let's get started. You're joining us from, first of all, where are you in Italy right now?
So I'm in Ragusa, Sicily, which is like the southern tip of Sicily.
So I want to just start with a quote that I saw on your website, and maybe just get some color context about this. On your website, it says, I now realize that finding your passion doesn't necessarily mean doing something you love. I love to do so many things, but for me, it meant finding the thing that made me say, I don't care if I fail, I can't not do this. And I guess let's use that as a place to jump off in terms of, what were you speaking about when you wrote that, or what is the thing now that you're like, I can't not do this?
So I was talking about Green Arrow, definitely, and the discovery of, since I was a little girl, I always knew that I would kind of wanted to do something to give back, or something that had like a bigger impact on the world, but I didn't really know what that would be. And then when I discovered that it was going to be Green Arrow and started doing the work and started building Green Arrow, I realized that, I love to do a lot of things. Like I love to dance, I love to be creative, I was loving what I was doing in digital media. But this work was like, when I hit the roadblocks and hit the challenges, I wanted to push forward more than I did with my other work that I had done in the past.
There's a point where I want to go back in time for a moment and then go forward in time. So going back in time, your background is in digital media, digital marketing. Can you talk a little bit about what you were doing before you left to do Green Arrow?
Yeah, I was making TV shows for the internet.
What kinds of shows?
One of our biggest clients was Verizon's Go 90, which I think is closed down now. And then through that, I started, there was like 3 of us that kind of created this new format. I think you've seen it a ton now. It's like, there's ads, there's shows where it's like stories told through text messages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it like looks like someone's phone, like you're reading someone's phone. So we were doing that, and that got really successful, and we were one of the first people to be doing that, and we kind of hacked the system and created a show on Facebook Watch based off of that, and we're using it as a way of possibly testing scripts to then be able to, or this was my idea with the other guy that the other two people that were like, we were like the three kind of like original creators of it. There's me, a writer, and an editor, a video editor. Was that it was an interesting way of testing scripts before you spent all the money filming it and hiring actors and all that kind of thing.
That's so crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. We built some crazy, passionate fans based off of just these text messages. And so then we could test stuff out, be like, okay, well, if he texts his cat, does that do better than if he texts his dog? And then you kind of like take that data feedback and then we would go from there. So it was like a really interesting way of testing out characters and storylines that we thought could then go into a full show.
A full production.
Yeah.
Were you building these? Were you building these episodes or these shows, like in parallel? So, for example, you said if the person texts the cat versus the other person, it might do better or worse. Were different audiences getting different, like choose your own adventure style, or were you just saying, hey, we're going to take a left turn here and then take a right turn here?
We would put out the same. I wasn't the data expert on it, but from what I remember is we'd put out the two different videos at the same time. And at the time, I don't know if you can still do this. You can kind of like not publish it to your page. You like kind of
it's like a ghost post.
Yeah, like a ghost post, but you get people watching it and you get reactions from it. And so we'd see what would do better, and then we'd launch the one that was doing better.
That's amazing. So how long were you doing that?
That project specifically, maybe a couple years or a year.
And that was were you working for a large agency?
I was working for not a large one, a small digital media agency, but we were producing a lot of content. And that was just one part of what they were doing. Like other people were actually producing, scripted television shows that were also going on the internet, but scripted television shows and things like that. And we had a whole
on behalf of clients, was it like branded content?
So that's what I was working on at the end for Tech Stories specifically, was branded content and seeing like how could we engage a brand in this kind of work.
Did you like it?
In the Tech Stories specifically. Yeah. I loved it at the beginning, and then I got so burnt out, and it was just a hard place to be at the end. So
why is that, if you don't mind me asking? Like, was it just the sheer volume of stuff that had to be? Is it working with client service? I mean, by the way, I worked for an ad agency for 8 years before, a small ad agency, and man, client services are tough.
Yeah, they can be tough. We had a really interesting group because we had done so well. Just like we were making lots of money just off of the videos that we were producing without brands, because we were monetizing them and things like that on Facebook Watch. So that was
independently.
Like
so like the agency owned this.
The agency owned Tech Stories, yeah.
Wow.
So our department was doing really well in that area. So we were also like experimenting with other formats. Like other formats could be like I don't know. I've lost all my pitch. My pitch talk from back then. But we were also creating other formats, like lengthwise, not Tech Stories. Some were live recorded, some were like the 10 things, the listicles, some were like cooking style. It was like during like the big overhead cooking show boom.
Some of what BuzzFeed was doing for a while.
Yeah, similar. Yeah, so we were kind of testing out like what other formats. Like BuzzFeed had really good formats. So we were like, okay, what other formats could work? Like we discovered this Tech Story format that's working really well. So what other formats? Because it was very low cost to make and was making us a lot of money per video. So that's kind of where we were at, and we were just kind of touching our toes into the branded content and seeing like how much we could sell these videos for, whether they were in our series that we were already writing or whether they were one-offs that we were creating as like a commercial. We did like some stuff for Shark Week.
Totally different things. Totally
Yeah,
different
we
things.
did some stuff for Shark Week. So that was like actually on television. You know, we did some of their title cards and things like that.
There's a point where then you're like, okay, I'm going to move to the next chapter, which was the not-for-profit?
So I had the idea for Green Arrow for a few years at this point. I'd read that article. I was inspired by it, but I still just like was kind of going around my advertising life. And I got moved from being like more on the creative side. They're like, okay, now you've built tech stories. You know the product really well. You know how to talk to people. You're going to go sell it. Like you're going to go into sales. And I was like, I have never done sales in my life. I don't know what I'm doing. How, like, I was a creative. Now I'm going to sales. What's this going to be like? And I decided to get a life coach. And so I walked into the office of the life coach, and in her bookshelf were all these books on prison reform and restorative justice. And I was like, oh, that's really I had no idea. You know, I had called her and been like, this is what's happening in my career. I want to be a good salesperson. Like, can you help me? And so, but then we had this other passion, and she was leading reentry circles, and she had been in the work a little bit, and she was the one that introduced me to Cheryl, the first person on the board. And at one point, a few months into us working together, she was like, every time you talk about tech stories and your digital media job, you fall asleep, you get hunched over, your voice goes low, and then every time we kind of switch and start talking about, you know, this Green Arrow, which wasn't Green Arrow at the time, it was just nothing, you know, it's just like this other idea, like you're up, you're awake, it's like you just had an espresso. She's like, what if we figured out how to help you exit tech stories and start Green Arrow? So she helped me with that transition of leaving digital media and setting up like a basic business plan idea and getting me in touch with some people for those initial Green Arrow steps.
I want to pause for 1 second because I want to just ask, I'm one of the in working with, I never want to say I'm a coach, but I think that's a lot of what I do is I'm like co-founder for hire, mentor, advisor. I rarely use the term coach. And one of the reasons I rarely use the term coach is because I meet an inordinate amount of people in my line of work that are a coach of some capacity or that aspire to be a coach in some capacity. Dude, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's like everyone was a yoga teacher and now everybody's a coach. And I say that, and I say this out of love because I work, you know, they're wonderful people and many of them are clients of mine. What I want to know is, why did you decide to go seek out a coach? Like what was in your head that goes, you know what I need? I need a coach, number one. And number two, in an industry where I feel like everyone is a coach in some capacity, and you are as well, right? You do some coaching. How do you
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. How do you seek out the right, like, is this something, do you think everyone should have a coach, and how do you find the right person?
Well, it was at the time when coaching had not been, like, it was at probably like its early adopter stage, I would say.
Okay.
So, and I said to myself, like, it was basically like, I don't know how to do my job. Like, how am I going to be a sales? So how am I going to succeed at selling tech stories? And I was too nervous to ask, you know, my boss that had just like quote unquote promoted me into
just
this
giving you that
thing, right? I'm like, okay, well, I have no idea what I'm doing, so I don't know why you trust me to do this. So I'm gonna go get a life coach to help me. And I interviewed like 3 or 4 people, and she was just the one that resonated. You know, I went with my intuition, I went with my gut, I went with the person that felt right, is what I would say. And since then, I've learned how to trust my gut and intuition even more. And then I do think that everyone needs a support pod. And whether you're paying those people that are in your support pod or not, that doesn't matter for me as much. But I do think that coaches and support people in that aspect are super helpful and powerful, especially like I've landed on that even more in the work that I'm doing. Like, these young people that we're working with can't just have one person that they can go to support. I can't have one person that I can go to support me. So I do think having that support team, if that's a coach or whatever, can really help. And I think having people that you resonate with, whether they've gone through similar things as you and that's why you resonate, or you have passions, or they're teaching you something brand new that's really supporting you. The work that I was doing when I was coaching was, I think my sweet spot is like helping people through transition. And then I was I was trained in breath work and different kinds of like different somatic practices as well. So, and then I also see like the role of a manager as being a mentor. That's how I felt when I was, a manager at the digital media company. I was like, well, how can I support my team in doing the best work? Like, okay, this guy over here wants to go be a pro editor, and this person over here wants to become a creative director. Like, how do I support the growth of that? Isn't that my role as the manager, is to like help everyone else be better at their jobs?
That's a smart way of looking at it. I think you're right.
That's kind of how I've always looked at it. And I guess within that is like coaching and mentoring. That's now very trendy.
One more question on this, because I want to talk about Italy, is who's in your support pod? And when you're thinking about a support pod, is it like, do you have that conversation like, hey, I'm building a support pod. Would you like to be my, like, how do you go about building that, and what makes a good support pod?
I think probably that's interesting to ask them. I don't think I've asked them, but while we're building this training program, like one of the things we're going to ask the participants to do for Green Arrow is to create a support pod. And I've been asked to be part of other people's support pod. Like there's this new mom, and I'm about to be a mom. And so she's like, I'm part of her support pod, even though she had the kid before me. I'm like, I think she's going to be more supportive to me. But just like the different things that we can bring. I would say the people in my support pod are definitely my partner. He's a big one. I have a couple best friends, and then my team at Green Arrow. It's very special. It's a very special team, and I ride that line a lot of like executive director, or like, I see it as we're both supporting and mentoring and coaching each other. So a lot of those people are definitely part of my support pod that I lean on a lot. Yeah.
Great. Let's start with what is Green Arrow. Let's just give right from the drop. How would you explain Green Arrow to someone that's just meeting you for the first time?
I would say the elevator pitch is that we provide gardening and mindfulness classes to young people that have been impacted by the criminal justice system.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So this is why gardening and why mindfulness. What is the overlap of those two things where you're like, this is the thing, this is the method I'm going to use to impact the world?
Yeah. So what I realized is that getting back to the earth and touching the dirt is healing within itself. And caring for something like a plant teaches you a lot about how you care about yourself as well. And, at the beginning, and my parents still say this, they're like, well, how are you gardening? Like, I never wanted to garden as a kid. It's not necessary. Gardening is not necessarily one of my passions, but I've been able to see how many gifts and lessons you can learn in the garden and how impactful it is on someone. I did grow up in the middle of nature in Vermont, whereas someone that's growing up in the middle of Los Angeles or spent, years and years behind bars hasn't touched ground or reconnected with nature in that way. So it's like an easy touch point for folks that they can relate to. Normally someone in their family had a garden or grew vegetables in their front yard or something like that. And then they discover like this peacefulness about it, and it just like grows a lot with the mindfulness piece.
So you grew up in Vermont, and what drew you to this idea of, I want to work with folks that have been impacted by the justice system? There's a million different ways that you can, I think, bring your gifts and talents in your life experience, and this seems very removed from that. Can you talk about why this particular constituency? So
I see a lot of potential in this population or this group of young people, I think that they have a lot of skills that in the regular school system don't really necessarily aren't seen as successful skills. And usually that's one of the reasons, with school being not somewhere where they want to be, that can be one of the reasons why they end up arrested or in jail in the first place. And I just really see this like incredible group of people that has this skill set. A lot of them are entrepreneurial. A lot of them, had to think on their feet. Like they have all these other like life skill sets that someone that just goes through the normal academic pathway maybe doesn't have or isn't exposed to. And they have this curiosity a lot of the times for like what's their passion and finding their passion and how do they discover that and things like that. I also think there's like a very interesting piece where they maybe haven't gone through the educational system, traditional educational system. So maybe their mindset and way of thinking is different enough to be open to a new way of life or a new way of living that the world needs now. I really believe that the world now we need problem solvers, we need creative thinkers. And I'm not convinced that our normal school systems really provide that. I think our school systems are still kind of stuck in what they were built for originally, which is creating, factory workers. So we don't really need to know how to memorize anything anymore. I mean, we have our phone. I don't have to remember anybody's number. I don't have to remember anything anymore, except for things, I guess, about me or different. So I think it changes the way that we're asking for, our younger generations to kind of show up and make an impact in the world and change what's happening. Yeah.
So you have this idea for Green Arrow. You're like, this is where I want to make an impact. You're coming from a background of digital media. And I want to go back to that in a moment. But, I do work with a lot of folks that have, an idea for a not-for-profit or an organization of something that wants to make an impact. And the biggest problem that folks have is like, where do I start? And so not having done this before, how did you think about like, oh, this is where I begin and like this is where the destination is or could be?
Well, so the original idea for Green Arrow actually came from an article that I read about a prison in Italy, and they were growing their own food, they were making their own wine, they were cooking community meals together. And I just kind of thought to myself, like, that's probably what should be happening in the States. Not even really knowing anything about the system and how it works. So I started out just getting lucky, and this has happened a lot, which I also believe is like why it's the right thing to be doing. Is that I just got lucky with connecting with the right people, and I just sat in a lot of meetings and listened and learned and heard tons and tons and tons of acronyms that I didn't know about and all that kind of stuff. And I just sort of learned to see like if the idea that I had was what was needed in the community, right? Because who am I to come in, one, being white, two, being privileged in many ways, three, never being impacted the system. Who am I to come in and say, this is what you need, I'm going to fix it for you? Like I really wanted to make sure that it was what the community was asking for. And it just so happened that it was, and it was resonating with some pretty big things that were happening in Los Angeles already. And so I just kind of learned about what I could offer and what Green Arrow could be, got connected with the right people, and then started, I remember like the first decision I had to make was, okay, am I going to become a 501c3 right off the bat, or am I going to be a fiscal sponsor? It's like one of the first things that I had to think about. And at some, I did a lot of research. I asked people a lot of questions. I figured out what I wanted to do, what was more convenient both with time and money-wise. And I just ended up deciding to just become a 501c3. Now, I don't know if I would do it different. I maybe would have created a nonprofit or a social enterprise at the same time. which I'm going to probably work on, in the coming year.
Why is that? I'm curious to what your thinking is behind that.
So having a nonprofit is not as easy and cool as it sounds. I mean, it's pretty awesome, but it's not. It's the same as running a business. Like what I learned in digital media and growing businesses. My parents were entrepreneurs. Like my close relationships, they've all been entrepreneurs. Friends, all these people, have very different lifestyle tracks, I guess. Like very much more entrepreneurial, starting their own things always. So I've been around that culture my whole life, and a nonprofit is just having a for-profit business that doesn't pay some of the taxes. Like you don't really get that many breaks on a lot of things. You still have to do payroll. You still have to have workers' comp. You still have to have insurance. You still have to have all these things. It's run like a business, and you have to go around asking. Yes, it should be run like a business, and you have to go around asking people for money all the time.
Yeah.
So there's like an extra layer where I remember hearing this nonprofit comedian guy speak, and he said, like if you have a product and your product is successful, it means that you're selling more of your product, right? If you have a nonprofit and your nonprofit is successful, it means that you're serving more people, which means that you're spending more money. So it's kind of like the opposite in that sense. And that just like has rung true with me since I heard it a few years ago. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can create also like a better economic ecosystem for communities if the nonprofit also has like a for-profit side or is a social enterprise, things like that. So I'm just at the beginning stages of learning about that, but yeah.
Oh man, I'm with you. So in upstate New York, we're dialing in from. Our zip code is 13501, and the joke is the zip code for Utica is 13501C3 because there are so many not-for-profits here, and we're like tripping over each other in a lot of cases. And I do see that where it's several folks that have an idea they want to solve a problem. They're like, well, I'll start a not-for-profit. Because I can get grants and donations, but then it becomes so much about getting the donations and not as much about like doing the work. And I wonder if you struggled with that at all, or how do you balance, the need to fund this thing with the need to do the work? Yeah,
it's a balance for sure, and I feel that a lot of the times, the dialogue and communication that I offer to grants, especially, and depending on their level and whether it's federal or not, that language is totally different than like what the work we're doing kind of is. It's sometimes how I feel. And luckily, one of my skill sets is being able to kind of like talk to anybody and figure out what this is what I learned in digital media and sales, was like figure out where the value ask is and kind of like understand how to get to people in that way. But I would say that right now we're in the middle of a process of like an organizational reset kind of process to figure out how to make those things line up more. And it's a combination of teaching funders what's really important and still communicating in their language. Like, can you give an example of that?
I mean, I'm super interested how you're navigating this. I get these questions all the time. I'm like, great, this is someone who's doing it. Give me an example.
Like for example, our tagline, right, is we offer gardening and mindfulness programs to young people that have been impacted by the system. That's what we're doing, yes. But underneath that, like my kind of secret agenda, so to speak, or what we've realized is coming to light through the team that we build, is that we're really like working on I haven't found the right language for it yet, but working on helping folks become more regulated within their nervous system, and helping folks heal from traumas that have created dysregulation in the nervous system, that have created a lot of the racial issues that we have seen even within their own communities, and kind of helping folks find like a different inner pathway through creating new habits and offering them tools to heal, if that makes sense.
It does. And I also understand how that is a harder, maybe could be a harder sell to a funder. But I also understand that to be like the longer term more sustainable, more impactful work. So you're in some ways, it sounds like you're not separating them, but it's like it's the layers of the onion, so to speak. That's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And then also when you apply to grants, some grants are like, we are interested in funding community leadership, which is something that's included in what we do. And some folks are saying we're focused on urban agriculture, and creating more food accessibility for those that are in food insecure places and food deserts. And so then your language has to change for those things, because you want to be able to, because we are doing those things. It's like I have been calling it, it's like the shirt that you put on, kind of. So, it's like the suit that you're wearing that day could be different.
That's a great way to think about it. But at the core,
yeah. Are you going to a black tie dinner, or are you going to, a beach hangout?
When you're starting something like this, again, I'm going back to some of the questions that I get for folks is when they're looking at a 501 or starting an not-for-profit, one of the big concerns is like, well, now I got to do a board. Now it's not mine anymore. How do you think about getting people to get on your team, and who was the first person that you got on your team?
Okay, so this is another process that I'm going through right now, because I was really fortunate to be connected just like with the right people. The first person I had on my board was this woman, Cheryl Bonacci. She's amazing. She helped start Anti-Recidivism Coalition. She's been in the work for years. And I got connected through her during my transition from digital media into Green Arrow. And she was super helpful before I was even a 501c3, any of that. So there was her, and then there was this guy, Farmer D, who I cold emailed. And I don't know how I found out about him. I think it was some random article, and he was a biodynamic farmer in the Encinitas area at the time. But his first project had been at a prison farm, like randomly. That was like the first project that he had kind of ever done was at a prison.
Did you know that? Is that why you reached out to him?
Yeah, I do. I think that is why I reached out to him. Yeah, I read an article and I was like, oh, this is really interesting that this was his first project, and now he's doing, this biodynamic farming for private companies, for community, all that. So I cold emailed him and was like, hi, this is kind of like my idea. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. And he was like, yeah, come meet me. So he's still on the board. And we just resonated really deeply with our missions and what he's doing. And so we've kind of, he's been a great mentor since then, and that was in 2019, I think. So the way that I first formed the board, because I didn't have experience, was what I realize now is almost as like a mentorship board. And I had come also from, corporate places where, your board of directors does rule everything, and your board of directors is who makes the decisions, and they are the ones that are putting in the money. And with this board, nobody had to contribute funding if they didn't want to, and it was built on experience. So it was those two people at first. Now we have 8 people on the board, and it's still a very experience-led and driven board. And we're going to have to switch at some point to help it be more of like a fundraising board. So we're going to have to like switch it up a little bit, because we do need more fundraising help. But one of my goals with the original board was to eventually hire all of them if possible. And so far I've now reached my limit in the nonprofit world, where you can have like 50% of your board also be like paid in some way. And I'm like just about at that limit. So we don't have like any full-time employees, but just about half the people on the board are involved in getting paid in some way, which is really exciting, right? Like that was my goal. That means that I have like these people that I looked up to that were amazing and are amazing and had all this experience and wanted to be on our board and believed in our mission, now like really involved and on the team.
So that's amazing that you're able to actually compensate people. I mean, and I guess to follow up on that, I don't want to make this all about like board governance, but I'm fascinated by this because I sit on a couple of boards. I've sat on boards that have been like all volunteer, where finance is always the conversation, and thinking about, I guess, do you have an opinion on, how critical is it, or is it not really, to be able to compensate people that are on the board or people that are providing, maybe not board members, but that are actually doing the work? Does that change the effectiveness or the speed at which an organization can operate? Or like, why did you decide like, hey, we got to make sure that people are compensated?
Okay, so the people on the board aren't compensated for being on the board. They've
Correct.
now grown into other roles.
Okay.
Yeah.
So such as, can you talk about some of those roles?
Yeah, one of them is now the program director for the new project that we're launching. We're launching like a training of the trainer program, and she's come on board to help us develop that program and what it looks like, and getting us connected with the right people that could teach it, and involving community members to make sure, again, like what we're building is resonating with those that have been impacted and those that are living in those communities. Another one is this man who was inside for 15 years, started working with us. I forget if he started working with us before, or I forget like when it was, where it was before or after he then came on the board. He came on as a co-teacher. He was very green at the time, and is now running his own garden, and is such an impactful person to the organization. He really gets the organization. He's like gone through the process almost of being a participant into becoming a teacher and leading his own space. He leads his own space all by himself. I meet with him like once every other week. He has it down. He knows what he's doing. He's growing stuff. He works with a master gardener for the things that he doesn't know. And so that's another example too of like someone that's on the board that's now doing the work with Green Arrow, has done the work inside himself as well, and has been impacted by the system pretty heavily. And I think like when I look at back to like kind of the grant pieces, and talking to a grant, there's all these questions about outcomes and what's your, how do you know that you're successful? And for me, like knowing that we have been able to support this one guy's life, in a bunch of different ways, and he's like now become such a close friend as well, that for me is a success. We used to go to a class and no one would show up to the class. It would just be this guy and then another teacher that we had, and the teacher would be like, nobody shows up. And I was like, that's okay. If you're like if you're just working with this one person and you're impacting just this one person, and this person is growing and being supported by the work, that's okay for me. That's more for me than, this year we hit 250 people, but what's the depth that you're going at, I guess, is what I would question a lot of nonprofits. And I think like one thing that distinguishes Green Arrow is we really want to go deep with people, because I believe, and a lot of the other people on the team believe as well, that that's where the real like human connection and human change will happen.
That's very cool. Can you talk to me about your first project? Like, where was it? Who was involved? Do you have any good stories about, maybe what worked and what didn't?
Okay, so then what happened was I started it during COVID. So I kind of had to switch to like, could we do this online? Which I thought was also really interesting, because I was like, okay, if we do it online, then we can bring people from high income areas of LA and these lower income areas of LA, and they can meet on Zoom and they can start forming connections that way, which wouldn't really be possible in person necessarily as easily. People would not be as open to that. Communities I don't think would be as open to that. So that was kind of interesting. I pitched that around for a while, but nothing really stuck. And then the first place that we landed at, which we're still at, is Anti-Recidivism Coalition. They have a reentry home that houses 20 young men from anywhere from ages 18 to 24, I believe. And those guys have come home anywhere from yesterday to 2 years ago. And coming home means like getting out of prison, being reconnected with community. So that was our first project, and I was very excited. They took a big leap on us, I think, or maybe they just trusted us, and I was like, okay, they're like, here we go, we're finally, like doing it. And I had already moved to Italy, which was also interesting. So this all happened like while I was away, and the other thing they got on board was they got Netflix on board to be able to launch the garden. So Netflix showed up, we had plants, and like there was like this whole event that really like launched that garden space, got the new dirt in, got flowers in, and really like revamped that space. And we've been there ever since. I think that was like 2 years ago.
So I want to talk about the Netflix involvement, because you got Netflix to sponsor this, or did they get Netflix to sponsor this? Was it a show on my block, or was it a program that they did? And I also understand you got Ron Finley to show up too.
They did most of that. Yeah, they did. ARC did most of that, and it was a show called On My Block that then also did community work. The guy that was in charge of it, who unfortunately passed away this past year, he was in charge of, and he was a huge community advocate, especially for, folks that have been previously incarcerated. So he was spearheading like these community projects, and we got to be one of those projects.
That's super cool. Do you feel like that name attachment, that brand attachment, helped accelerate Green Arrow at all? Or do you think it was like, look, this to me, it seems like you get that involvement of that partnership on a first project, that it conveys social proof in some capacity, whether or not that's 100% real. I'm like, wow, obviously I saw that on your website, and I'm like, oh, this is really big. Like, how did that impact your ability to move to the next project?
I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure if that impacted as much as like Anti-Recidivism Coalition on its own is one of the biggest organizations, nonprofits doing this work in LA. I would say them and Homeboys have, the biggest organizations in terms of like people working for them and their budgets and things like that, and the length of time that they've been doing the work and the impact of their work and just the amazing things that they're doing. So I think that helped more than anything. I think we probably could have capitalized more on the Netflix part of it. But yeah.
You got any stories about any of the individuals that you could share that have gone through this process? Because I think it's also, I understand, this intersection with gardening and mindfulness seems very powerful. But, have you gotten to meet with any of the individuals that have kind of gone through this process and gotten any of their stories?
Yeah, we're working more on capturing their stories, and our teachers would definitely, who work one-on-one, on the locations, would have more stories for sure. I think the biggest one that I always go back to is that same young man who, came to us at the beginning, is now on the board and now like running his own program. And he talks a lot about how the garden really helped him and became a place of meditation for him. He was running this space for a while, a community garden space, and he would go even when they didn't have class. He's like, I needed to go to the garden today, so I'm here meditating, and taking care of it and seeing what's going on. And then we're working on collecting life stories and stories throughout their time at Green Arrow. That's something that we're going to start in the next year or so, as we've built and have more locations now and more folks to connect with.
How many locations are you guys working on right now? Or do you do kind of one at a time?
We have 5 right now. No, they all go year round. Most of them go year round. That's our goal, is to really be there year round, at least once or twice a week. Ideally twice a week.
That's very cool. All right, I want to shift to present day and future, because one of the things that is very interesting to me is like you're in Italy right now. You're in Sicily, and I hear nature in the background. I hear roosters, and it's sunny and it's beautiful, and it's all of the things that I've been to Italy a few times, and my wife Sarah and I not joke, but it's like, man, how do we get there? How do we get to a point in our life where we're able to go somewhere for a month at a time, 2 months at a time? There's this innate desire to have like freedom of movement, and you did it. And can you talk about your how you ended up in Sicily?
Sure. First of all, I think you need at least 3 months somewhere. I think if you're only spending 1 month somewhere, like that's just when you're kind of like getting in your flow and getting used to it. So I think you got to plan on 3 months.
Noted.
In 4 places at least. First of all, I grew up traveling a lot, and I grew up splitting my life between Vermont and the Caribbean. My parents decided when I was very little that they were done with the snow, they were done with -10, and they were going to escape between, Christmas and February or March. So every year I did that throughout school, and I think it just taught me that you can do whatever you want, and that whether you have kids or they're in school or not in school, it really opened me up to a lifestyle of experience and of living differently. So I think I had that in the background. The other thing that really helped was I was already a dual citizen, so I didn't have to think about having a visa or any of that. I haven't thought about that at all. That's a question I get a lot. It's like, how did you deal with the visa? How long can you stay there? I don't know. I have no answers to those questions. And I've had the citizenship for a while, and I never thought I would use it. There was never anywhere that I visited or traveled that really felt like home. Even when I was living in Los Angeles for 12 years, I was like, it just didn't feel like home. And then once COVID kind of started opening up again, me and my best friend decided that we were going to leave Los Angeles and we were going to go live with my parents in the Caribbean. They had been in the Caribbean the whole time. They did not experience COVID. The island just closed its doors to everyone, and they were going out, having dinner with their friends, listening to live music. My dad was it was cool to see my parents live somewhere for more than 6 months, because at that point, they had been 6 months in Vermont, 6 months in the Caribbean, always kind of switching their life. And so it was cool to see them really live somewhere for over a year and watch what they cultivated and just how they really settled into their life, versus I think they spend a lot of time on either end, with the switch, going through the switch, which is another thing to think about when you start living in more than one place. And so me and my best friend, this is going to be a long story, so you can cut out whatever you want. But
I'm so interested in this.
So me and my best friend were well, let's go visit my parents. I was I can finally see them. I can finally go to the Caribbean. It's one of the places that I love. It's one of the places that for me feels like home. I think Vermont to a certain extent as well, and the Caribbean for sure. I feel so good there. And so we're okay, let's do that. So we got all prepared, did all our stuff. She was supposed to stay for a month and then maybe find a retreat to go to in Costa Rica. We left in February, and we ended up staying until the beginning of July. My parents left. They were it's getting too hot. We're leaving. Here's how you close up the house. And we were okay, we're going to stay more. We were having too much fun. It was just, we both had worked enough where we had enough savings and were able to work online, especially once COVID happened. COVID opened up the ability to work online. I don't think that Green Arrow would be where it would be, or my life would be what it is, without that change in people's mindset that we don't have to go meet in person and do all these in-person meetings. So I think that helped a lot too. So in July, it started getting really hot. And her summers were spent in Puglia in Italy. And so she said, hey, now that I've spent so much time with you at your house, do you want to come hang out with me and my family in Puglia for a month? And I said, okay. And we got on the plane and got to Italy. And went down to Puglia and had a great time in Puglia. And I was supposed to go back to LA for an in-person thing, and it got canceled and got switched to Zoom. And I was working with this mentor who has a Native American, indigenously rooted nonprofit in the Bay Area. And he was like my mentor. And actually we're working with them again, and it's amazing. It's just like they're called Milpa Collective up in the Bay, and they're the ones that are helping Green Arrow like with our structure and organization, because I want to make sure that there's like a lot of intentionality behind that, and that the work we're doing is not just work we're doing for the young people, but it's work we're actually doing in the organization too. I think that's really, that's really important. Sidebar. But so, and he told me, he was like, oh, well, didn't you grow up in that? Like, isn't your ancestors from that area? And I said, yeah, they are. And he's like, all right, whatever mountain you're close to, or whatever mountain, like, do you know the town that your family's from? And I did, and we had gone there when I was 5 years old. He was like, okay, you need to go back there, and you need to do this ceremony, and you need to get up at dawn, and you have to face this direction, and you have to, he had the list, right? And I was into it. I was like, all right, yeah, why not? I don't have to go back to LA now. I'll go do that. And that was for sure a launching. That was before the programming with Anti-Recidivism Coalition happened, before the Netflix event. It was still we didn't really have a plate. Green Arrow didn't really have their first program yet. And so I went and did this whole ceremony. I found my distant relatives based off of I had this photo that just so happened to have an address on the back. But of course, you're in Italy, so that street doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
I went to the town hall to be like, can you help me find my ancestors? This is my last name. And they were like, no, we're not helping you do that if you don't know when anybody was born or anything. They did not care. And I was like, well, can you at least tell me where this street is? Because I can't find it on my Google Maps. And this was when I spoke no Italian. I don't know how. And so they helped me. They were like, oh, yeah, it's over there, in that direction. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, thanks. There's it was a very small town, luckily. And so I ended up on this street. And I ended up meeting, it was lunchtime, so everyone was home or peeking out their window wondering what this weird tourist girl was doing. And so I took advantage and was asking all the old Italian women and men, do you know this street? Am I on the right street? And they would say yes or no or whatever. And then one of them was like, oh yeah, I know that person in the photo. Let me call them for you. And so she called up my aunt, I guess, or however we're related. And my aunt came over and, she made me lunch, which I realize now is just lunch for me, total Italian welcoming experience. She cried. We went inside the house where the picture was taken. I hadn't seen her, in almost, I guess at that point, almost 30 years. Yeah. So we reconnected. I did my ceremony, and then it was the middle of summer. Everything was booked. I couldn't find any place to stay. And I ended up in Ragusa, the town that's near me. So I ended up there. So I was like, okay, I found this place. I don't remember how I found it. Maybe some blog was top 10 places in Sicily kind of thing that you should go to. I went there and there was nobody in the town. All the restaurants were closed. All the bars, which is where you get coffee, all those were closed. I had picked this apartment specifically because it was near this coffee shop that had plants and looked really cool. Closed. Everywhere was closed except for the dive bar of coffee spots. So I would go there every morning, and the guy was like, why are you here? It was a total dive bar, where it'd be dark, and if it was a bar in LA, it'd be the one where there's you drink the whiskey with the ice in the back, and it's all the regulars.
Did you figure out why these were all closed?
Yeah, because it was summer. So he was why are you here? Why are you here? And I was like, I don't know. It's really been hard to find anywhere to eat. I don't know what to do. And he was like, you need to go to Marina di Ragusa. And I was like, oh, I haven't heard of that. He's like, you need to go to Marina di Ragusa. And I was like, okay. So one day I was on the fence. I was like, I really should do work, but I kind of want to go to the beach. And my intuition was just like, go to the beach. So I went to the beach. There was people boogie boarding. There was people surfing. There was people, period. And everything was open because it was August. And so everyone from the Ragusa town goes to Marina di Ragusa in July and August. And that means like everybody. And it's 20 minutes away, mind you. It's not like it's that far.
They move there? They like stay there?
Yes.
Or they just commute?
Yes.
They move there. Okay.
They move there. Yeah. So I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the place where I need to be, because I had been boogie boarding back in LA, and I was like, oh, this is great. It was pretty crowded, but I was like, oh, this is great. Like it felt like home, it just like felt good. And so luckily I found a little apartment there that I rented for a couple months. In that time period, like everyone went back. I remember my neighbors that I had known, like seen kind of for a couple weeks, they're like, oh, we're leaving today. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, where are you going? They're like, we're going back home. And I was like, oh, where's home for you? Thinking that it was, I don't know, like Milan or I don't know, somewhere far away. And they're like, Ragusa. And I like had to stop myself from laughing. Yeah. Because I was like, oh, you're going 20 minutes away. That would be like growing up in Vermont, like our like tiny town was 20 minutes away from our house. So I was like, it was really funny. But yeah, I stayed there for 2 months, and then I met my partner, and then I just kept staying.
Easy as that. I just kept staying.
Yeah, I just kept staying. Yeah.
and you've got a little one on the way.
And now I have a little one on. And my best friend just so happened to, she stayed also. Her parents were living in Milan at the time. So she just stayed also. So then we were kind of like at least in the same time zone. And then she ended up moving about a year or so ago down to Catania, which is like an hour and a half away. So.
Wow, that's crazy. And so now you speak Italian. You're an Italian. Do you still are you there? Are you planning on like being bi-continental, or what's your plan moving forward, or is there one?
Yeah. So since I've been living here, which has been about 3 years now, I've been going back to Los Angeles and the States about 2 to 4 times a year, usually for 3 weeks. And that will probably be what it continues to look like. A little less, obviously, once the baby is born, but probably something similar to that. To check in on Green Arrow, touch base with everybody in person, see family and friends.
I have so many more questions about being an expat and life in Italy and wanting to learn more, but I want to be respectful of your time and let you get back to the sunshine and living your best life out there. Where can people learn more about Green Arrow and you and your work?
Sure. Yeah, the best place is probably our Instagram or our website. Our website is just greenarrowcolab.org. That's collab with one L. And our Instagram is greenarrow.colab, again with just one L, COLAB. That's probably the best place. Yeah, and they can email me from there or message, whatever.
Love the journey, Casey. Thank you so much for spending some time, and it's been a great pleasure getting to know you a little bit. And good luck with the baby and Italy and Green Arrow. This is awesome. Really appreciate it. Okay, I want to thank Casey one more time for joining me all the way from Italy. It was great. I got to get back to Europe one of these days. And thank you guys for tuning in. If you're not on the email list, I would invite you to get on the email list. You can go to rustbeltstartup.com, click the button there, and I will send you the occasional email with podcast updates or just really cool things on the internet that I've been listening to, watching, or reading. I really hope you take the time to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.